Welcome to the RideShare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
All right, so Alejandro is the general manager of Viral Code, Beat's strategic partner for the launch of its electric mobility services of Beat Tesla, available exclusively in Mexico City, and Beat Zero, now available in Mexico City and Bogota. He began his career in the ride-hailing industry as Beat's operations manager for Colombia, and shortly after became the country's general manager. He then served a regional position as their regional general manager of New Verticals, where he was promoted to GM of Viral Code, the sister company of Beat, which is also part of the Free Now Group, a joint venture between BMW and Daimler that has become the leading mobility provider. So Alejandro, I'm excited to have you on today. How are you doing?
Very good, Harry. I'm very excited to be here too. It's been 4 years reading your content. So it's
very
amazing
cool.
to be here.
But you've never reached out to me in the past, huh?
No, I thought you were out of reach. Now I know you're not.
You know, it is funny. I have met many people over the years who sometimes they've left the role that they were working on, or sometimes they're still working in it, like yourself. And they tell me, oh, I listened to your podcast. Oh, we read some of the articles. And it's funny. So I know that there's a lot of lurkers. I think that's generally how the internet works, right? There's a lot of people lurking. For every one person that comments, there's, 10 or 20 lurkers. So it was cool to hear that from you, and very refreshing that, some of the work we're doing is, kind of aiding and abetting some of these cool products and projects that are happening out there in the real world.
Definitely is.
Very cool. So tell us, I'd love to set the stage a little bit with Beat. For example, for those who have never heard of the company, the ride-hail company Beat, can you tell us a little bit about the company, where you're operating, and then we can dive into the specific EV initiatives that you're working on?
Amazing. So let me start by Beat is multiple stories into one company, but there are two specific stories that I really think stand out. The first one is that Beat is a true entrepreneurial story. Beat started in 2011 in Athens, Greece.
Yeah.
If you go back in time, 2011 was the time in which Greece was going through its biggest economic crisis ever. And Beat actually arose when four visionaries won a contest of the Athens municipality to boost Greek economy. And that was a 40,000 euro prize. And that's where all the story started. Four entrepreneurs, 40,000 euro prize, somewhere in Athens. From then on, it's the second story. It's a true David versus Goliath story in this sense. Started there in this context. 8 years after this, we're a part of Daimler BMW Group Free Now. We operate in 5 LATAM countries, over 20 cities, where we fight very strongly for market leadership in all of them. And especially through a very, very strong hyper-localization, hyper-innovation, and very clear value props, very clear communicated to our users. And this has been how we've been growing to over 26 million passengers and over 800,000 drivers in LATAM.
Wow.
But as we're always looking for ways to really transform mobility, this is what moves us. What says behind me, you set the world in motion. We're here to set the world in motion, to really transform how people move within the cities. We think it's time for a new chapter. And this is where the whole New Verticals, Viral Code story comes by. And well, I'm sure you want to dig deeper into that.
Definitely. For sure. Yeah. Before we get into that. So I guess at a high level, I think what's interesting about Beat is the company, it sounds like, was sort of founded, maybe still somewhat based in Greece, but primarily you guys are sort of known for operating in the LATAM markets as a ride-hail company. Is that right?
Yeah, we are known for operating in LATAM. We have some of our engineering and product still organizations in Europe, both Greece, Amsterdam, and as well a tech hub in Mexico. But we're here to solve for LATAM mobility needs, which we find are extremely important, extremely relevant, and sometimes way behind the usual infrastructural goods of other parts of the world. So we do feel our value proposition makes a lot of sense in LATAM countries, both for the rider and for the driver, in countries in which development and scarcity, jobs, etc., sometimes is more the rule than the exception.
Yeah. So LATAM markets would be places like Mexico, South America, Brazil. I mean, I guess the two big standouts are usually Mexico and Brazil and LATAM. Are there other sort of major, I mean, Colombia, I think you're based in Colombia. What do people, sort of when they say LATAM, what countries are they focusing on, at a high level? And then specifically too, maybe if you can share for those who aren't that familiar with the region, what are some things or characteristics that stand out about the cities? I mean, is there more traffic than normal? Are there fewer cars, or what should we expect in, the majority of LATAM for someone who maybe has never been?
Let me go through that. So we operate in 5 LATAM countries right now: Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Argentina. If you go through LATAM, of course, there's a lot of diversity, but there are things that are really, really, really common in most of the cities. One thing, as you said it, is there's more often than not lack of road infrastructure, and that jumps into a lot of congestion. Actually, Bogota is the second city of the world with highest congestion. Mexico City is just right there, et cetera, et cetera. The second thing is that economies are a lot more fragile in many senses, and it's not hard to find macro cities and capital cities with double-digit unemployment rates, and usually 40 to 50% informal employment rates.
Yeah.
So these are cities in which as well new ways and new sources of income are highly appreciated and highly needed in this sense.
Yeah, I think that's always been one thing. And I visited Mexico City a couple times now. And I think that's one thing that sort of always stood out to me, is that it seems like working for Uber in a place like Mexico City is a pretty good job, that it's sort of, there's a lot of opportunity there, right? Like when it comes to driving for these ride hail services, relative to the US, where I wouldn't say driving is looked down upon, but, I think there are, sometimes people are looking for better jobs, basically.
Here, it's a very, very decent way of earning money. It's a very flexible way of doing it. So, and given the fact that modes of transportation are not necessarily the most reliable ever in the cities, they're packed with demand as well. So there's a lot of riders that are really interested in these services because they have scaled up the level of the service that they were used to getting in other modes of transportation in these cities. So it's been a true revolution that time. It's been an amazing revolution that time when it first came, and it still is. It still is a really strong part of how our neural transportation layout is just developing.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think that background is super helpful. So appreciate you sharing that on the ground knowledge. And so let's get into sort of the Beat EV initiative. And I guess first, maybe you can explain what is Viral Code, because I think it sounds like this is a sort of sister company, but still, obviously, you worked at Beat and now you're at Viral Code, but now you're back with sort of there's a lot going on there, right? So give us the high level on that, and then talk about Beat's transition and sort of what they're investing in when it comes to EVs and new infrastructure.
Amazing. I think that when I explain the model, it become a lot clearer to understand what Viral Code is. So I'm going to start with the model. Okay. The first thing is why we're doing this. So as I said from start, the reason why we exist as Beat and Viral Code is just to transform the way people move. And we've been doing it so far over 4 years in a very successful way with our, let's say, classic ride-hailing model. But what we have seen is that classic ride-hailing models are going to go that far in two specific topics that are very, very relevant needs in LATAM countries. So the first very relevant need is around safety. Even though ride-hailing is perceived and is a way safer way of moving in the cities, still in a city like Bogota, to give an example, 88% of citizens say that they don't feel safe mobilizing within the city. And this is explained by a lot of external contextual situations that happen in the city itself and that were exacerbated by COVID as well. The second, so first need, safety. The second very important need is when you go to the overall environmental context of LATAM cities. LATAM cities are highly populated, highly populated. And actually, if you go into the air quality index of any LATAM cities, none of them in a consistent way is in a better level than hazardous for some specific people.
Wow, yikes.
And then when you go into then how is mobility evolving to cleaner mobility, electromobility, you then see that, to give you a sense of dimension, Colombia is the country in LATAM where we operate in which there is the highest nominal amount of electrical cars in the market. It is 0.17 per 1,000 inhabitants. This is not even close to top 10 countries in the world. Norway is 81 per 1,000. 81%. 81 per 1,000 inhabitants.
81 per 1,000.
So then you see two very interesting needs. One is safety, and the other one is these cities truly need to move toward cleaner mobility, and they are not doing it on a very efficient way.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess these two needs that you're mentioning, safety sort of happens on more of an individual level, right? Like as an individual passenger, this is something I've heard, from riders in Mexico City, especially is that, when Uber first came onto the scene, especially compared to a taxi, a lot of young females that wanted to go out, it was, they felt very safe taking an Uber. And there's also something too that I noticed is that they thought it was very hip, it was sort of a cool way to arrive to a lot of places, but the safety was something that was huge. Whereas the environmental context, I think individuals say that they care about, like saving the planet and all that, but I think that it's much less of an individual priority and more of a, sort of government or municipality. So it's sort of interesting that those two things you mentioned are kind of, one appeases more individual and the other appeases, more of the city, sort of planner types.
And they both feel to us as a company,
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe they're targeted to different needs and to different people, but they're both extremely important to our long-term sustainability. And we think that's our objective at the end of the day. So when you come with these two needs, then we need to understand how to actually provide these two needs with one service.
Yeah.
And then two main pillars for us. The first one was, if we really want to have 100% certainty, safety, business and service, then we need to control the supply. And what does control the supply mean? It means that we need to own and maintain the assets, the cars. It means that we need to hire the drivers, train them, and monitor them so that the service is of the highest quality standard possible. And then you're talking about a very different business than what our usual ride-hailing model is. We stop being a platform that connects to different users, and we become a bit of a service provider with a very heavy logistical component towards it, of owning assets and actually managing assets, of hiring a bunch of people and having a very FTE loaded company and actually managing these people into the top of standards. And that's why Viral Code then exists, because we then understand that, we might have the technology, we have an amazing platform with 26 million passengers, but this is just half of the business now for this specific service. Which are the services that as Beat Tesla and Beat Zero. Now the other part is, how do we actually manage a heavy asset, own car, own fleets,
interesting
air drivers model?
I like that model a lot because, transportation is all about getting people from A to B, right? And traditional ride-hail model sort of uses that marketplace of connecting drivers and riders. But once you start getting into the business of, like you said, owning the asset and hiring the drivers, you're really more of a fleet operator at that point. You're kind of, obviously, you're leveraging technology to connect people, but I think a majority of the job is now managing that fleet and that experience. So it's interesting that you guys kind of built it out in that way. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I guess just to be clear too, so for example, Beat operates, I guess the normal level of service, is it just called Beat? And that is sort of the typical ride hail. And then you've got Beat Zero, which is sort of EVs, and I think maybe even some hybrids too. And then Beat Tesla, right? So those are sort of the three different levels.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we want to have different needs served in the same platform for different demand occasions. And of course, the core ride-hailing model type Beat service is extremely relevant still, and operates as one of the services in the platform. But as you said, then as a complement, you would have, for example, in Mexico City, Beat Tesla that operates under Viral Code, let's say, structure, in which, once again, we control the 360 experience of the user through 100% electric Tesla vehicles, of course, and Beat Zero, which is a bit of a more affordable stage towards electromobility, with other kinds of cars, but still owned cars, hired drivers, and overall full control of the experience, which we find super, super different in the sense that we're doing, and as you say, it's very clear what you said. There are two different needs that we're solving, and they come to two different people. So you actually, I think you actually wrote a Beat Tesla, and maybe you wrote a Beat Zero too.
Yeah.
And the experience you had, the quality of experience you had, the amenities you were offered Wi-Fi, you were offered music by Bluetooth, you offer all the experience towards it, is for us to bring of your ride an extension of your home. We want you to feel as comfortable, as safe, as reliable as you can feel. And at the same time, then when you go to the other stage, that Tesla, that car is actually moving electromobility towards the right direction in these cities. Just to give you a sense of dimension once again. In 2021, 15% of the cars that were purchased in Mexico City were purchased by Beat viral code in order to go into the city.
Oh, wow.
In 2021, over 300,000 people moved through the electromobility services in Mexico City. And it's probably the first time they ever did ride an electrical car. So what we're trying to do here is really push forward into fast speed, the electromobility just adoption in the cities by having people have their first experience. And that we think is a very, very replicable, effect of what we're trying to do right now, apart from the city itself.
Yeah, no, I took a bunch of Beat Teslas while I was in Mexico City, and I'll definitely share some observations I had in a second here. But I'm curious, from a company perspective, what do you think is the main benefit or the main really goal and objective, in sort of rolling out this completely new, Beat Tesla, and you're launching, you have to sort of launch it with its own, sort of basically company right within it, viral code. I mean, this is a pretty big endeavor. So how does this feed into the larger goals of Beat, and like, why is it so important to the company, basically?
I'd say there are two main things. The first one is, you told a bit the story about ride-hailing in that time. It came first as a full innovation. It was perceived as this very high quality service, very innovative. People felt it was cheap to move towards, et cetera, et cetera. It has such an obvious value that it became almost a commodity. Yeah. And in that sense, a lot was sacrificed, which is not bad. It just fitted a different need that the actual cities in that time required to be just supplied. So what we're trying and what we're aiming to do through these services is once again bring this sense of quality of the user, the rider, in the center of the experience back to the markets. And that to us is super important in order not to only differentiate as a company, but also to just create a virtuous cycle between our ride-hailing classical connection platform between riders and users, plus this other one in which people with specific uses, specific demand occasions will find a lot of value. So I do think it's a very interesting way of differentiating, of bringing back the sense of quality and the user back to the center of the value proposition. I would say that's the first one. The second one is that, not gonna lie, we're winning time here. We're understanding what the future mobility is going to work as. We're understanding what it implies to have a fully electric vehicle fleet in all its senses, in its performance in the streets, in the charging capabilities that we need to build, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we think this is going to be a very interesting competitive advantage sooner rather than later, because this is all knowledge we're building for this mobility of the future. We think this is the way it will go. And we are definitely sure that what we've already done for 2 years puts us one step ahead. So it's a massive bet for the company in this sense. Yeah,
no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I like the two observations. I mean, I think probably no one would disagree with the fact that, the future of mobility, especially in a shared fleet capacity, is, electric. Teslas obviously, can command a high price. And, I think I just had on a fleet owner here in the US, Sunil Paul, who actually founded RideShare with Sidecar. And one of the things he said is, even when them listing Teslas on car sharing sites, it can command a high price just from a marketing aspect. People want to be in the Teslas, and then plus all of the benefits of the EV and lower maintenance. So I think that concept is really interesting. And actually, your first point that a lot was sort of sacrificed. I mean, I think I see this all the time and hear from, I've been doing rideshare for 8 years. Most people don't make it that long, right? That's a long time in rideshare years. It's like dog years, I guess. And
you're so just ride sharing almost.
I'm not going anywhere, but most people don't make it this long. And definitely quality. I mean, I was one of the first Uber drivers in 2014, sort of passing out water and making more money. And, that experience has really deteriorated. And, transitioning to some of the experiences I had in Mexico City, maybe we'll focus on that and, sort of Beat Tesla and, the operations there, since I'm somewhat familiar with it. But for example, we got into an Uber and literally the window handle didn't work, right? and, a lot of these guys don't use AC and it's hot. And my wife and I were kind of joking about it, but I mean, it was sort of like those types of examples. And I think definitely the quality of vehicles on Uber in Mexico City versus the US is definitely at a lower level. But I think that I don't think everyone really cares about that at the end of the day. Most people want to get from A to B safely, but like you said, right? Hey, if normally, let's say I'm on vacation, right? It's like normally I might take an Uber when I'm at home to get places I don't really care, but I'm on vacation with my wife right now. And so some of my observations, I took a bunch of actually Beat Tesla rides. I'll give you permission to go look into my account and you can see I took it all over the place to the pyramids, to the Frida Kahlo Museum, everywhere and anywhere. My wife really liked it though, right? She's not in the rideshare world. And, frankly, she was like, wow, these Ubers are kind of shitty. And every time we get into a Beat Tesla, it's nice. The driver I definitely noticed the drivers were more friendly, maybe because they're paid a little bit better. And like you say, they're employees. And so they get better training. So I definitely noticed the experience was definitely better. Plus the fact that you're riding in a Tesla, which again, I think, just commands, even though I don't actually think the Model 3 is the greatest rideshare vehicle because there isn't a lot of room in the back seat. If you've got a big, tall driver, like I'm 6'3" which I don't know what that is in meters, but that's tall. And, when I sit all the way back in my, in a Tesla Model 3, like the passenger behind me wouldn't have a lot of room, but still, I think that Tesla commands a lot. So I guess my main observations were the fact that, it was definitely an elevated experience. Obviously there wasn't a driver always available since you guys do have a fixed number and you don't have that variable supply, like Uber does, or like that you guys even have with your normal Beat operations. But I actually also thought the pricing was I know the base prices, obviously I'm assuming are kind of more expensive than, the Beat ride hail option. But there were many times where, if I was comparing Beat Tesla to Uber, Beat was actually cheaper or comparable pricing, right? Because Uber uses surge pricing and all of that. So those were sort of my 3 or 4, kind of high level, observations. But obviously, as you can tell, I was definitely a big fan of the service. And that's actually why I reached out to you guys, because I thought it'd be cool to dig into the numbers. And I will say I had quite a few conversations with the drivers in Spanish. So I got a lot of insight from them, which I'm now going to verify with you. And maybe they were wrong. Maybe some was lost in translation, but we'll talk about it.
Amazing. And a lot of things that you said are the reason why we're doing this.
Yeah.
So you definitely got the message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So talk about a little about, sort of operating, let's say Beat Tesla, in Mexico City. I think that one of the drivers told me that there, for example, off the top of my head, I believe they said you have 300 cars, actual Teslas in Mexico City. There are 2 charging stations. And then the pricing, is obviously maybe a little bit of a premium compared to the ride hail service, but the drivers are paid, I guess hourly as employees. I don't know if they receive benefits or not, but I think that was kind of like most of what I teased out in my conversations with the drivers. Does that sound accurate, or anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, it's 4 different, let's say, entities that play a game in providing the service.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, as you said, is the cars themselves. As I told you, just as a point of reference, we bought 15% of the electrical vehicles bought in Mexico in 2021.
Oh, wow. Yeah, in all of Mexico.
In all of Mexico. So it's a massive
right.
footprint we're leaving in the market itself. But the cars, it's not only purchasing them, and you have to have all the operations of charging, maintenance,
right,
and actually having the amenities as well in place in order to serve the rider at the right moment at the right time. So then you go to the second part, charging. And this is super important.
Yeah.
Given that the electromobility, let's say, industry is not yet evolved or developed in Latin countries, then you need to build charging infrastructure.
Yeah. Alejandro, there aren't enough chargers in the US either, so don't think it's exclusive to LATAM.
It's not exclusive at all, but it's a bigger challenge. It is at this stage, because it's not only about chargers itself, it's about the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We have literally built already 1 megawatts of charging capacity in LATAM as we speak.
Oh, wow. And so these are only available to the drivers on your network?
These are only available to our operations with high performing super speed chargers that charge a car from 0 to 90% in 40 minutes.
Okay.
But then you have to build all the infrastructure around that. So we actually have our own hubs, our operation hubs, in which we have our charging infrastructure, our cleaning infrastructure, our maintenance technicians, in order to have the asset at the just perfect sense of quality.
Yeah. So I imagine charging is kind of the biggest piece of that puzzle. I mean, obviously Tesla is, one of the things, EV in general, they're sort of known for low to no maintenance, right? So I'm sure there's some maintenance, but relative to a normal fleet, it should be a lot lower. Even with the regenerative braking, right? You should be replacing brake pads less frequently, I'm guessing. As far as the charging piece, I guess So if I'm a driver for Beat in, let's say, Mexico City doing a Tesla, I mean, most drivers, I assume, live, out in the outskirts of Mexico City. It's a pretty big place. I know the, sort of central areas like Roma and Polanco are more expensive. I assume they can't afford to live in there, very similar to how it is in the US. And so do they have a car? Do they come and drive into the depot? Do you give them the Tesla to take home? Or how does that like actual logistics work?
Actually, the Teslas, they never sleep.
Okay.
The cars never sleep. They work 3 shifts a day. Basically, the car leaves the hub, does a shift. Just to give you a sense of dimension, a shift of let's say of a Tesla or Zero car is about 150 kilometers long, 8-hour shift, and hence it consumes about 70% of the battery capacity. Hence, when they are done, they come back to the hub, they charge, and they go back again. And the drivers, they just work on shifts.
Got it. So new driver gets into the car. Okay.
No driver gets the car because no car stops ever.
Yeah. Well, that timing works out pretty well then, because there's 24 hours in a day, 3 shifts of 8 hours, and the cars do last about, close to 8 hours, I'm guessing, most of the time. So that worked out pretty well for you guys.
It's a very, let's say, it's a very complex operation in the sense of how you just make driver shifts, car charging, and city demand coexist and actually optimize for it. And this is what I told you. This is why it's a big bet, because we think these are the models of the future. We think these things will only get more and more traction. And we are 2 years and 3 countries ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what makes it super interesting and super complex.
For sure. I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on an interview is, I mean, we've talked to a lot of fleets that are doing EVs, or, Uber and Lyft have announced, we're going to transition our fleet to EVs in 2030, 2040. And that's a long time from now. And there's a lot that needs to happen, charging being a huge component of that. And, just the fact that, I could see, right, hey, like, there's probably, I would have guessed, a couple hundred cars operating in Mexico City. I mean, even just the price, right? 50,000 times 200, I don't know, never do math live, but I think that's $10 million. Maybe more, but so it's sort of like, I think you guys are definitely operating at one of the highest scales I've seen in the EV ride hail space. So it was cool to see, frankly, like, I think a very solid product. So we talked a little bit about the charging, and then so I guess on the driver side, how are they getting to these hubs each day? Do they take public transportation, or they have a car of their own usually?
Depends on when the shift starts. Public transportation is not 24/7.
Right.
For example, in Mexico City, it ends at 11 at night, and it starts back again at 5 a.m. 1 hour less, 1 hour more, basically. So we do provide transportation benefits or services, specifically for those shifts in which they cannot arrive to the hub or leave the hub. And the rest, it's on the employee itself, which is something really important just to take into account, because once again, public transportation is not necessarily the end solution. So depending on the city of Latam, you do need to build alternate solutions that complement public transportation.
Well, I guess what would be some examples of, because I think this is actually kind of like one of those problems that you don't really think about from the outside, right? Like, especially in LATAM, where personal vehicle ownership percentages are much lower than in the US, right? So it's less likely that you have a friend or a family member who can give you a ride. And, we see this a lot with fleet owners in the US, right? Someone with no job and no car, they can go work for Uber, they can rent a vehicle. That's amazing. But it's like, okay, how do we get to that vehicle, right? If I don't have a car, and especially, it makes, for example, what they do in the US, okay, we'll give you an Uber credit, right? But if you have to get to and from that vehicle every day, that's more of a taxi model, what they use here in the US. So it's a little more challenging. So I'm just curious, like, how you've actually solved for some of that, or you sort of just leave it up to the employees to kind of figure something out?
We always solve where we need to solve and when we need to solve. And this is something very important. At the end of the day, the quality of the service is 100% proportional to the engagement of our employee, of the driver itself. So it's very important to us that the engagement is high, the conditions are very good, and hence that will only translate to the quality of the service that the users receive. And that's why you receive the experience you receive, because it all adds up to that.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So we talked a bit about charging. And, I think one thing that's interesting, you mentioned all of the aspects that go into managing a fleet. And I think one of the key sort of unlocks that Uber, kind of revolutionized back into the day is this concept of variable supply, right? They use surge pricing to get drivers like me who are lazy. Normally I wouldn't drive Saturday night at 2 a.m., right? I'd sit home and watch TV or go to bed. But if I can make double, if I can make triple, and passengers are willing to pay that, they pay me more, they get more drivers on the road, but they don't have to pay for my downtime. So how are you thinking about, basically this challenge where, if you have enough drivers for a Saturday night, you're going to have way too many for Tuesday afternoon. And how do you kind of balance that with the ETAs, that obviously customers like myself, we want to see cars available, and, what ETAs are you guys shooting for? So how do you think about that when you're the owner of the fleet?
So, the demand supply laws apply independent of whether we own the fleet or not. So that's a natural problem and a natural challenge that we always hear. But then it comes to one word, and one very important word, that's utilization. So at the end of the day, what you're trying to always do is to have your assets fully utilized. And what you optimize for are low demand hours, not necessarily high demand hours. You play with your demand supply laws in order to always have utilized at low demand hours that would imply naturally low utilization. So at the end of the day, it comes a bit to a similar management, but with a fixed, let's say in the short term, supply count. So then what you play for is you optimize for always having cars in high peak hours, and you create demand in low demand hours. And as that becomes, let's say, a bit unsustainable in terms of the quality of service, then it's a very good signal that you need to scale further your supply. And you need to scale further your fleet base.
So you're basically saying that, like, you got to work pretty hard during those low demand hours, optimize that on the driver's side, create demand, so that, then during high demand times, right, it's sort of like that's the easy part because you got lots of rides and lots of requests. And the good thing is
that given the fact that we control the experience, we can always think of how to better serve demand occasions that are specifically tied to some specific hours or days of the week. And hence it becomes a very creative and very interesting exercise of how do I build the best experience for this specific demand occasion that is usually very concentrated in these parts of the week and of the city dynamics. Well, so it goes back to the user always.
Yeah. So the one downside with this, right, is that during high demand times as a user, I'm going to open the app and I might not see a car available, or I might see higher than average ETAs, right? Is that just sort of a cost of doing business this way? Or how do you solve for that? Because, I mean, when you think about Uber's model, I mean, their number one sort of, what would you say? Like the one thing that they do not want riders to see is no cars available, right? That's why they have surge pricing in the first place. It's like literally like their most important thing to them. It's like the only unfriendly aspect is surge pricing. And they institute that because they don't want you to see no cars available, right? Or reasonable ETAs. So is this just a potential, sort of downside that you have to live with, or how do you kind of solve for that?
It is a downside that we have to live with, but that does not mean that it is not one of the key priorities still. But at the end of the day, what is very important and what adds a lot of value is that the experience is so different than that the user, let's say, tolerance to having to wait a bit longer.
That's a good point.
It's a lot higher because you're just gaining so much more for a marginal higher price.
For sure.
Then you have a way higher tolerance to not having the car in 2 minutes and maybe in 5 or 7. Or maybe just requesting it in 10 minutes from now. Still, this is something very important that we need to keep solving. How do we become a lot more flexible in how we get more supply in the streets at some specific hours? But that as well comes a lot with how we plan shifts, with how we schedule car shifts, and how we get most of the cars in the streets in the most important hours of demand.
Yeah, actually, a light bulb sort of went off in my head when you said the user tolerance to wait is higher, because I experienced that myself, right? If I'm looking at Uber versus, beat Tesla, it's like, 1.5 versus 10 minutes. Like I'll take 10 minutes any day of the week, if I can ride in a beat Tesla and it's guaranteed, I sort of know what I'm getting. And, obviously there might be situations where like I'm in a rush and I have to get that right, and I'll make that exception. But I do think you're onto something there with the user tolerance, right? Like it's almost like a select club, I think, think of it, right? It's like, oh, I really want that beat Tesla on Saturday night to get home or get to the bar, and I got to be one of the first ones to reserve. Maybe I reserve it, right? In the product side, right? It's like maybe there's the option to reserve it, or maybe the most loyal customers, or you do like a loyalty program, like you get to a second or third tier, you get priority or first crack or whatever it might be. So I think there are interesting opportunities to sort of reward your most loyal customers, like you would do with your drivers too. But I do think, I guess, like, I don't know that it's the biggest deal in the world when you have an aspirational product like this, where it's like, hey, if there's not a car, that's available, it's like, damn, it's almost more like my fault. Like, I should have called one earlier. I'm like less getting mad at the company and more getting mad at myself. Like, there's something I should have done, right? So I think there's something there that you can definitely lean into.
What's still very interesting is that, as you said, and as you're just taking the conversation towards, it's all about demand occasions. Mm-hmm. What do you need at that exact moment? And what we do truly think in Bit, and that's why the hybrid model is so interesting, is that when you do need a very short ETA and 100% availability, then you have the Bit core service in your app as well. One button from you.
Yeah.
So that's what it comes when serving different demand occasions into one platform. That's the answer.
Yeah, no, I actually really think that the synergies between the different services are really nice. In the Beat app, I think you guys have done a good job. Like, it's funny how you're describing it. It's like, sounds like it's a completely different back end and operations and all that. But from the customer side, I'm just some dumb customer. I go open the app, like, oh, do I want to beat Tesla? I have no idea what goes into getting me the ride. And I think that's how you kind of have to think about customers. Like, they don't care about all the work that you're putting in. They just want to open the app and call a ride. So I think it is nice how I can easily select, beat Tesla, beat Zero, and it's pretty clear from the customer point of view, obviously, and the pricing is according. So I imagine that there's opportunities for you guys. I'm sure it's somewhere in the product roadmap. Hey, if I don't get a beat Tesla, it automatically, reroutes me to the next level. And if I can't get that, it automatically, I can select that in my profile. So I do think there are some good synergies in the app. I'm curious, what if you've looked at Uber as an example, because actually while I was on vacation in Mexico City, they rolled out this product called Electric Comfort. And so for those who don't know, the Uber app is super confusing these days. It's like you open the app, you've got UberX, which everyone, that's 90% of rides. People know that. Uber Black is sort of the licensed commercial drivers in the United States. And I know they also have that in Mexico. And then they also have a level called Uber Comfort. So this would be UberX rides, but things like a Toyota Camry, something that's like a little more spacious than like a compact 4-door sedan. And so that's Uber Comfort. And they also have Uber EV, which is, all electric vehicles. And then they rolled out Uber Comfort EV, which is basically like you can request and you'll get a Tesla, maybe a Polestar 2, but it's a lot of Model 3s on the Comfort EVs. So just wanted to share that quick background and sort of get your take on it and, sort of like how you think it stacks up, or, if you even care what they're doing or maybe not.
We, of course, look at what our competitors are doing. We do it all the time. But
Uber isn't operating this in Mexico City, or I think any of the markets that you guys are doing.
They're not. They're in the US, and they literally just it was news 4 weeks ago or so. It's super new. And it operates in a very different context. And I think this is super important. There are a lot of things we see of what Uber and competitors do because, well, we're here to compete. That's obvious. But we're also here to compete in a context that's very different from the one of the US market for a lot of the reasons I just stated. So it implies needing different solutions. At the end of the day, owning this, why Viral Code exists, owning supply, owning cars, owning drivers, hiring drivers, owning experience is an answer to a solution towards a need in a very specific context, in which, as I told you, EVs are just extremely scarce. The capacity or the acquisitive power of a driver to actually acquire an EV is just almost impossible. And hence it would be just too slow, too small, and actually too little impact. So it's very interesting. What this does tell us when we see big players like Uber going to this direction is that we're doing the right thing sooner. And that to us is of course an assurance of what we think the industry will move towards. So that's the part that's important. That reassurance, of course, helps understand that we're moving the right direction and that we moved in the right directions 2 years ago.
Well, and that's sort of probably where I would agree with you most, is I think it sort of highlights the fact that, like, hey, this is a big opportunity. Uber's doing something, but with these specialized rideshare operations and products, I actually think that, like, I would much rather be in Beat's position because Uber builds a mass market product, right? Kind of like you were saying, right? You've launched this whole viral code, part of the business to basically manage the fleet and supply and all that, right? Like Uber, the reason why, I had Lyft's sustainability director on my podcast, for example, and he said 1% of their cars are EVs, right? So it's like 1% of their cars are EVs because they don't own any of the cars. They can't force that transition, right? You can't force drivers to hire and, to buy those vehicles or transition. You can nudge them, right? But there's only so much you can do. So I think when you're creating, a specialized rideshare product, right? You look at Uber's product or competitors and you sort of understand like, who are they building their product for, right? Like we can actually do a much better job of EVs. We work with like scheduled rideshare companies. Like Uber's scheduled product is not great. Like if you're going to a dialysis appointment, a medical appointment and you need a ride, like that driver can just cancel on you. It's not that big of a deal to them, but you just missed your appointment, right? Or airport ride. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities to create a much better product than Uber or bigger competitors in these specialized verticals because of, the underlying logistics or the underlying, sort of market dynamics. I think that's very cool. I have one or two more questions about the Tesla product, if that's cool with you. I was really wondering, like, what's the most compelling aspect, do you think, about the Beat Tesla product?
You actually just give a very good example with the dialysis. The scenario you paint.
Well, you can't steal my answer.
No. But it comes to one very important word: reliability. Reliability. That's the word.
Gotcha.
You will always get a very consistent service. You will never have your ride canceled. You will always have the right kind of service, the right kind of driver, the right car of cars in the right kind of conditions for your trip. So reliability is a very, very important word that creates stickiness in riders because the Tesla, the car, the EV generates a lot of intent. It's super sexy. You want to try to. The first time I ever rode in a Tesla, I'm going to be 100% honest here, was in Bit Tesla in Mexico. And for Latin markets, that's something very, very special, very scarce in these cities. But what makes it come back always is the reliability of the service. The fact that the quality you're receiving is always at its highest end, and there's literally no risk of that not happening. So that's the most important part.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, just from like we've talked about, the marketing, especially, Tesla in Mexico City. I mean, I saw a few Model Ys and a few Model 3s on the streets, but I mean, very few. And overwhelmingly, the most number of Teslas I saw were Beat Teslas. So I think, I don't question the fact that you bought 50% of all the EVs in Mexico last year. That's totally believable stat to me. And, as I'm sure listeners and viewers can tell by now, I'm a big fan of the service. I had a really great experience. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And, I kind of wanted to round out here. I wanted to just learn a little bit more what's next for you and Beat. If folks want to try out Beat or learn more about what it's like to, try a Beat, definitely let us know. And then, as I teased earlier, I'm going to give you the chance to ask me a question and we're going to try to do it in Spanish. Maybe I'll give a Spanish answer and an English answer. But first, let's start with, what we can expect for what's next for you and Beat. And then we'll transition into the Spanish question, which I'm probably going to fumble through.
So to the first question, what's next? You had an amazing experience in Bit Tesla in Mexico, and what we're sure of, and as I said at the start of this podcast, is that the needs that Bit Tesla and Bit Zero and overall this new business model solve are very transversal to all the major capital cities of Latam. So the first thing is that we want to bring the solution of Bit Zero to the rest of the capital cities in Latam. We started by Mexico. We launched just 2 weeks ago, Bogota, Colombia, and we're launching another city in the next 2 weeks. So that's the very immediate focus. And the reason is because we feel that the cities need it. We feel that the users deserve it. And we feel that it will complement very well overall our platform and our hybrid model between asset light and asset heavy, let's say, business models. That's the very important focus right now. And we're a company, we've won a lot of the markets in Latam by being super focused. And that's something that is very important to us. So this is where we have our minds right now, as we, of course, keep complementing and keep improving our overall ride-hailing value proposition for both riders and drivers, adding this other component to the table fast, effectively, and with strength is what we have our mindset on.
Very cool. And if folks want to learn more about Beat or follow what you're up to, what's a good spot for them to do that?
I would say the best is, of course, well, if you guys are in Latam, Download
out.
the app.
Yeah, I've got it on my phone.
That's the first thing you should do, of course. It's this. You never know a service better than actually trying it. So that would be my first invitation, of course. Because we're not in Latam, the bit.co and all our social media accounts.
Yeah, you guys are pretty active on social too. I saw a LinkedIn post and Twitter post, so definitely good to follow you guys on social and stay up to date.
We think that it's very important that the people can get access to our value proposition, and we take that very seriously. We think we have something good, an amazing product that serves a lot of needs with very different, let's say, solutions within it, and hence we don't want it to keep it to ourselves. We're super active because we feel it adds value.
Yeah, very cool. Well, y ahora para la última parte del podcast, tú puedes preguntarme una pregunta en español y voy a probar a dar una respuesta buena. So, si está listo, puedes preguntarme.
Muy buen español, mejor de lo que esperaba. Mi pregunta sería, tú estás, como tú lo dices, tienes muchos años en esta industria, conoces muchas vertientes, muchos caminos, muchas empresas, muchas cosas que han funcionado y que no han funcionado. Mi pregunta sería, viendo hacia futuro, ¿cuáles son las dos cosas a las cuales quisieras ver que the ride hailing industry se va a mover? Y si crees que movilidad sostenible va a ser una de esas.
Bueno, okay. So, nunca estoy nervioso cuando estoy hablando de ride hail, pero es posible, es la primera vez porque estamos hablando en español. Okay, so, las dos cosas que pienso, el último, me gusta este concepto de fleets, que está haciendo con Beat, en el pasado, los manejeros de Uber nunca ganan mucho dinero y hay muchas cosas que no se gustan y ahora durante la pandemia está ganando más dinero, pero la concepto de fleets me gusta porque cuando puede comprar muchos carros, puede recibir un precio bueno, puede arreglar el carro. So, me gusta este concepto porque en el futuro tenemos muchas cosas como EV, electric, también autonomous, y todos de estas partes van a require, fleet, operaciones de fleet, right? So, es un negocio diferente de ride hail, como, estábamos hablando, ¿sí? Es un negocio diferente, right? So, es la cosa primera. Y también pienso que hay mucha oportunidad en estas partes de ride hail especial, como, todos sabemos que Uber hace, right? Es un producto para toda la gente, si quieres ir a punto A a punto B, es muy bien, pero hay muchas oportunidades como, electric, también rides al aeropuerto. Hay veces cuando necesita un producto que es especial, right? Se llama, me gusta specialized rideshare, ¿sí? So hay muchas oportunidades aquí en Estados Unidos. Ahí tenemos NEMT, es votos a, médico, appointments de médico y otras cosas. También tenemos rides para niños donde, necesita manejeros, que hacen, en persona, y porque para manejar a Uber no necesita, hacer mucho, todos pueden manejar. So, estas cosas son dos que estoy, haciendo en el futuro. Y, wow, that was tough. Okay, so.
That was good. That was actually very good.
All right, so not my best answer, but if you want, I can also give one in English, because I think the only problem with my my Spanish is that if I know the context, I can sort of get by and do well, but it's tough to do like more industry words, sort of industry, and think like if you just ask me some random complex question, I would not know where I'm going. But how was my answer in Spanish? What do you think?
No, it was actually very good. some Spanish speaker would understand perfectly what you said. So that was the objective at the end.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to leave all this. Luckily, I will be honest, we only did one take for the Spanish question and answer. We did it all in Spanish. So if any, I've done probably 4,000 media interviews in English. That's maybe the first question I've ever answered in Spanish. I don't know if I'll be, called on to Spanish television any soon to be an expert in ride hail, but I'll keep practicing. And Alejandro, I really appreciate you coming on and putting up with my terrible Spanish at the end of this podcast here. I'm a really a big fan of Beat, and I'm excited for the future, and wanted to get this message out. So thanks for coming on.
No, thanks, Aaron. Whenever you're back in Latam, just let us know. It would be amazing
Definitely.
to have you here.